The Christian says to the Buddhist, you're either a demon or you are a lesser revelation. The Buddhist says the same thing about the Christian.
You are actually not Jewish. You're actually not a Christian or a Catholic. You're actually not a Buddhist. You think you are. Again, I've spent my life looking at all these traditions. Good luck. You're not going to find a tradition that has all your answers.
Who is Jesus? Who is Muhammad? Who is Moses?
I'm completely convinced that people levitated. I'm completely convinced people have near-death experiences.
2 years ago, I witnessed a Christian miracle, but I still did not convert. I didn't convert at the time, not because I thought it was fraudulent. I think the miracle was genuine, but because of the existence of other genuine miracles in competing religious traditions. But they can't all be right. So who has the ultimate truth? I've been tortured by the question of which religious tradition has the right God ever since. And my guest, Rice University's Jeff Kripal, has given me the most compelling response yet. After years of talking with every scholar of religion I could get my hands on, it is these sets of interviews that I find most compelling by far. And if you are at all curious about the religious question, I cannot recommend Jeff's work enough for both scholars and seekers. If you want to be invited to online and in-person lectures, seminars, and events that I host across the world, then please join my email list at jonathanb.com to be kept up to date. Without further ado, Jeff Kripal. So, Jeff, I come to you asking for advice as both a scholar and a seeker. And so to give you a bit of backstory, I was raised Protestant, like many teenagers, grew away from the faith. And in college, I was working through personal suffering, this worldly suffering, about desire, the classic growing angst of a teenager.
Yeah.
And I got into two religious traditions, Rene Girard's Catholicism, who problematized desire socially, and certain sects of Tibetan Buddhism, who problematized desire ontologically and phenomenologically. And my first foray was to solve just worldly problems, okay? So I wasn't really interested in the metaphysics, the next world, but what it did do was it convinced me that there was something here.
Yeah.
This is not, as the modern scientists or materialists say, just complete voodoo, right?
Right.
Now, my second foray into religion was actually about last year when I read one of your colleagues, Carlos Ayer's book on They Flew, on a historical argument for levitation that I couldn't find a materialist explanation for. And because of that, I actually witnessed a Orthodox miracle myself. So it's this icon, Orthodox icon, yay big, of the Virgin Mary and Jesus. It's in Taylor, Pennsylvania, and it oozes oil, mirror, infinitely. And I saw it do that for 15 minutes as the priest or the father took it out and proceeded to anoint everyone in the room with it. And I was just, my metaphysical worldview was completely blown out of the water. And then, to much of my Christian friends' chagrin, I did not immediately convert to Orthodoxy because I felt like that was the wrong conclusion to draw. Witnessing this one miracle gave a lot more credence to the other miracle traditions that I was familiar with, right? Whether this is the Buddhists, the Hindus. And I feel like my problem with religion is the exact opposite of many moderns. They don't think that there's anything here. I think there's too much here to decipher. And my problem, I framed it as what Sextus Empiricus calls equivalence. It's not when I think a tradition like Christianity is wrong, it's that there's an opposing and mutually exclusive Orthodox claim that I can't determine between. And so my problem is not whether to take a leap, it's whither to take a leap.
Right.
So that's the problem I've been stuck in. What do you got for me?
Yeah, welcome. Welcome to the club. That's my problem. I believe too much, as it were. You know, one of the things that I grew up Roman Catholic in the American Midwest, and the claim was always that, well, the Catholic Church is right because miracles only exist in the Catholic faith. And that's just not true.
Right. Empirically, that's just
It's just not true. And when you study comparative religion, you learn that there are actually miracles everywhere and always, as it were, as far as we can see back and everywhere we can see. And so the question for me isn't whether to be religious, as it were, it's how to be religious. And the problem is religious identity. It's It's not that there aren't things happening. It's not that there aren't miracles happening. It's that those ethical systems get built up through very elaborate social and political and economic channels. And I grew up inside a tradition, and I don't have a problem with Catholicism per se, but I know that its ethical systems have histories.
You know how the sausage is made.
I know. I know that for a fact. And I know that what the ethical systems are, what the Catholic ethical systems are, have an inside and an outside. And I know that they're very different on the inside than they're on the outside. And my assumption, which I think is perfectly true, is that the same is true everywhere. And once you reduce religion to ethics, I think you're done. I think it's not even interesting at that point. So this is a different conversation.
Yeah.
Whether truth is ethical at all.
Right.
And whether those categories even make sense. I'm not saying it's unethical. I'm saying it's truth is beyond good and evil, to use Nietzsche's language or the Upanishadic language. I mean, I really don't think it's ethical or moral in a social or egoic sense.
Right. We're going to talk about your methodology of new comparativism and looking between the religions. I still think I'm still at the stage of examining each Orthodox tradition to see if any of them can be true.
Yeah.
For the following reason.
They're all true, by the way.
Well, the Orthodox reading of the Orthodox religions.
Yeah.
So the Orthodox and exclusivist claims.
I know. They all say we're the only truth. Or
right.
We're the ultimate truth.
Or the ultimate, yeah, after Vatican II and stuff.
Yeah.
And so my question is, the problem I have right now, right? Again, it's not, I found this great contradiction within a tradition. It's that they're equivalent. But that equivalent doesn't mean that one of them is necessarily wrong. Right? And so I also don't want to draw the opposite conclusion. So my question is, why are you so certain that one of the Orthodox, like maybe the Christians just got it right, maybe everyone else is a demon or a lesser revelation? Why are you so sure that's wrong?
I've spent my whole life looking at different religious systems, and that is a conclusion I've drawn, or that is an intuition, that all of these religious systems give people something, and they do different things, and they lead to different ends, but none of them are ultimate in this sense we're talking about. I mean, look, when I was a kid, and I was surrounded by people who were religious in what I would call transactional ways. They believed such and such and performed certain rituals to get certain things. And I was always the kid who said, yeah, but what if it's not true? What about the truth? Is there a God? Did God have a son? Is Jesus truly human and truly divine? I mean, these were like real issues for me. And I think what modern education does to some of us is it holds out this truth that isn't just transactional. And because I think a lot of education, it's about vocation, it's about business school, it's about medical school, it's about law school. It's like skill sets, essentially. And let me back up.
Yeah, please.
Let me back up. So over this last holiday season, I did something really nerdy, and I read Plato's Republic, believe it or not. I read the whole thing. And it's very clear that education, even in ancient Greece, yes, part of it was very much about making the better soldier or the carpenter but part of it was getting out of the cave.
Right.
And if you're out of the cave, you see the light. You literally see the light. You see the good or the beautiful. And then the goal is to come back into the cave and to talk to the people, talk to the prisoners back in the cave. But the cave's the cave. And you've seen the light. So you know darn well that people are seeing shadows on the wall, as it were. And that's really where I'm at, I think all of these religions are shadows on the wall, and they give the prisoners something, but they also take things away.
Right.
And all of them are like that.
Right.
I've spent my life looking at all these traditions. good luck. You're not going to find a tradition that has all your answers.
You often say that the best hermeneutic is one that can explain all the data, that doesn't have to take any of the data off the table. Again, my challenge to you is the orthodox interpretations of the orthodox faiths, they do explain all the data in the following example. The Christian says to the Buddhists, you're either a demon, because you're trying to use your emptiness nonsense to make our believers nihilistic.
But they're not a demon.
Or they say, Vatican II, you are a lesser revelation, right? You are a lesser revelation for less advanced cultures, essentially. Yeah. The Buddhist says the same thing about the Christian. I've talked to these masters. They either say they're a demon, they're trying to help you believe in an essentialist soul, get you stuck in samsara, or, and a Buddhist master literally told me this last year, this is for lesser revelation. This does not approximate our ultimate truth. So my challenge for you is, they do explain the data. They do explain that the other miracles are black magic, right?
It's not persuasive, though, to me.
Right.
I mean, I understand the religions at their most acute or their most intellectual do comparison. They do explain why there are other religions and they relate themselves to those other religious systems. But I'm just not persuaded by their answers because I've heard all those answers. I've heard that. And no, they're not demons. They might be lesser revelation. I mean, we can talk about how reality is organized and what reality is, but I don't think the Orthodox Christians have the ultimate answer either.
Right.
I think it's much more likely that the Buddhists they might actually have the
closer to right.
They might actually, but that is a choice I make. Let me switch metaphors.
Please.
Or switch. So I train graduate students and I say, look, you don't have any business being a scholar of comparative religion until you've lost at least two worlds. And they look at me and they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, look, if you haven't lost a world, you still think your own religious or cultural or secular world is ultimate. You think it can answer all these questions. If you've lost that world, the chances are extremely high you've just jumped into another. And that might be Orthodox Christianity. That might be secular scientism. That might be whatever. And now you think that one has all the answers, but it doesn't either. And when that world then starts to collapse or you start to question it, you start to hesitate. You're like, well, why should I jump into a third world?
Right.
Because that third world isn't going to be ultimate either. And it's at that point you become an intellectual.
Right. And that kind of mirrors my journey where I've investigated two traditions and I'm like, well, hold on, but they say claims I can't differentiate. But then what about the others? I draw that conclusion, right?
But here's the problem with that answer. You're basically alone. You're talking to weird people like me. You're like, there are people who inhabit that space. Yes, there are. But we tend to be very nerdy and very intellectual about it. And we
persecuted often.
What's that?
Persecuted historically.
Yeah, and we don't have these large communities or these large traditions. So this is why I say this orientation represents a kind of new era or a kind of future humanity that doesn't exist yet in any large numbers.
Right. This is a question I have for you, but maybe I'll frame it in my own context, which is, I'm not even sure what it would take to get me to go into one of these Orthodox religions. Yeah. Let's say Jesus comes down right now in this very room. It's on camera, and he says, Jonathan, I am, what he says in Matthew, I'm the one true way, right? And I'm like, well, wait a second. Jeff's had that experience with Kali, like showing up to him, and this Buddha master has an experience of Nagarjuna popping up. So is there anything in the world, historically, philosophically, phenomenologically, that could happen to you? Is there anything that could happen to you to get you convinced by, let's say, one of the Western monotheisms?
So again, I think Jesus actually does appear to people, but so does the Buddha, so does Nagarjuna, so do all these other. So I'm deeply suspicious of religious experience. And it doesn't mean I don't take it very seriously. Of course, I do. But I want to keep all of these religious, I believe too much, Jonathan.
Right.
I want to put them all on the table, and I want everybody's religious experience to be considered, not just this one or that one. And once you put all those on the table, it really changes the table.
But that's why I asked you the question. What would it take to get you at this point to go back to the, let's say, Catholicism? Like, what would it take?
I don't know.
Right. But isn't that concerning? I mean, is it concerning for me?
No, it's not concerning to me at all, because I think going back to the religion is going back. I think, I often refer to believing backwards. Belief itself is you're affirming to someone else's altered state that happened in the past, or someone else's interpretation of that altered state really is what you're really affirming. Why?
Right.
Why are you doing that? It's like near-death experiencers. They'll want me to sign their name or sign my name to whatever they think the afterlife is. And I'm like, I can't do that.
Right.
Because if I do that, then I can't affirm this other person's near-death experience. Everybody is having a slightly different experience of the afterlife. What I can really affirm is when you come back from the afterlife, or you come back from a near-death experience, and you affirm that these are all interpretations of something that people are experiencing, yes, then I can sign my name to that. Then I can say, okay, let's go that direction. Let's do that.
And again, just for our audience, this is not going to be the entire conversation. We're actually going to go to a positive view of non-dualism, filter. But let me again continue grilling you on this one point.
No, it's okay.
Because, I mean, this drives my Christian friends crazy when I say this. But I tell them, if everything in the Bible happened exactly as it said, literally, I say, what's the big deal? Resurrection? That happens all the time. Pagan gods get resurrected all the time.
It does.
Empty tomb, Tibetan Buddhists today, their bodies disappear, rainbow bodies, very well reported. Miracles, there's a lot cooler miracles in the history of religion than multiplying fish and turning water into wine, right? Eternal life, Taoism, forgiving sins, tantric masters taking up people's karma and then resolving it. And I ask them, like, it drives them crazy, right? Like, what is the big deal? Even claiming that he's God. I and the Father are one. This is a common claim within Indian mystics, right? Is that the kind of thing you're gesturing at? Like, I can affirm everything.
Well, again, it's more complicated than that, because, of course, not everything in the Bible happened.
Right. But I'm saying even if.
Right. Yeah. I think, again, it's believing too much. It's not believing too little. It's you're affirming everything. You're not just affirming this particular tradition or this particular community. I read the entire Bible. I was trained in biblical studies. I know it well. That was my original tradition. It just ain't true what people say about the Bible. It's just nonsense. It's not true.
Can you give an example of you think the most compelling example?
Well, this whole notion of family values is complete nonsense. It's not in the New Testament text. It's anti-family, really, at the end of the day. There's a kind of sexual transgression that runs throughout all of the biblical texts, both the Jewish and the Christian texts. And the idea that we're going to get some family values, it's just nutty.
Right. Jesus says, if you don't hate your family, you can't, right? Or he tells be a eunuch for the kingdom of God.
Yeah. I mean, I literally, I've written about that. I wrote about the eunuch passage, and a eunuch is someone who's
feminized.
I mean, whose balls are cut off, And so there was really this affirmation of sexual renunciation and a kind of sexual transgression in the teachings. And I've literally had a copy editor tell me that's not in the Bible. I'm like, well, it is. It's right there. It's like, Matthew 17 or whatever it is. I'm like, come on, it's right. There's the Greek. And he's like, no, it's not. It doesn't exist. And I'm just like, but it does exist. And this is the problem I have with a lot of things, with a lot of religious claims, they're just not held up by, if you just look at the scriptural text. Why are you giving so much authority to a bunch of texts written thousands of years ago? Why? Why do you have to have everything rooted in the Bible, for goodness sake? What about all these other scriptural texts? Why any scriptural text? Why not rooted in human experience and in the human being? You know, why give yourself over to some authority or some textual tradition from the past that certainly exists, but it's still a kind of willful submission.
Yeah, well, I think this is the maybe difference between where our paths are, you having been so far ahead of me in the sense that
I'm 63. Yeah. I'm really crabby. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work.
Exactly, because I think I'm still at the stage of, look, I just want to take the Christians in the most charitable light. Everything you say is true. This is Hegel's method in the phenomenology of resolving equivalence. I'm going to say everything you say is true. Can I still find imminent contradictions within your text? That's kind of my project now.
But I know it's not all true.
Right.
So how can I say that? And
so let me ask you this. In your current view, who is Jesus? Who is Muhammad? Who is Moses? Are these exactly who the Orthodox faiths claim they are? Are these complete frauds? Are these genuine saints that their tradition kind of got carried away with?
So my own view is, well, first of all, we don't know. We don't even know if Moses existed. Jesus and Muhammad, certainly historical figures, but we don't know their personal experience. I mean, the Gospel of John is not the historical Jesus. But my assumption is that a lot of these historical figures had some kind of experience of divinity, and their followers frame that in a particular way. You know, they used Greek categories and to talk about Jesus, and they used Arabic and categories to talk about Muhammad. So everybody gets framed in a different way, and it's part of the culture and part of the historical tradition. But this experience of divinity, or what I call the superhuman, I think it's universal, and right. I think it's as far back as we can see. And I think it gets framed and interpreted in very different ways.
In the following sense, today we see a glowing being come down from the sky. We say it's a UFO encounter. Yeah. In Fatima, they say it's a Marian apparition, and Muhammad thinks it's the Archangel Gabriel. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. And so I think the orb of light really comes down and really messes with human beings. But I am not at all persuaded by the religious reception or the religious interpretations of that.
Right.
And I'm not persuaded by the UFO interpretations either, by the way.
Right. Yeah, that was abundantly clear in your books. Let me give you a quote from your first book, actually. Jesus hardly knew himself in some clear and unequivocal way. Yeah. Rather, he came to or constructed his own self-understanding through the abiding sense of this powerful presence through the sacred narratives of Jewish scripture, ethnic memory, and colonial suffering, through the efficacy of his magical works of healing and clairvoyance, and in the mirror of his followers' answers to his own honest question. Who do you say that I am? In this reading, at least, Jesus was not asking a question for which he already had the answer. He was co-constructing his identity through the answers of his disciples. Fascinating interpretation, because it goes even stronger than I think a lot of the historical critics who claim that the early Christians didn't know who Jesus was. You're saying Jesus himself didn't even know who he was. Why is that?
Why does anybody know? I mean, right. I think if you talk to experiencers to this day, there is a level of experience where if people are really honest, they're like, I don't know why that happened. I actually don't know who I am. You know, the ego or the self is a social contract for sure, but am I just that? I mean, I wake up every morning and I'm like, wow, that was a weird dream. Who was telling that crazy story? Well, I was, but it was a part of me I don't have access to, and I am not controlling, and it's going off on some weird story. And I think a lot of I think most religious experiences like this to a certain extent. It's some other aspect of the human being who is having this experience or showing this to the social ego, and the social ego doesn't understand or doesn't know. And I don't see any reason why Jesus would be different.
Right.
So that's the assumption, is that he was a human being, and
Right.
and he had this split in him, and there was one part talking to another part. One of the things this raises for me is, first of all, that passage you read, that was really good. But that's kind of my point, is that I'm better writing than I am speaking. And so, like, people often write me, or they'll say, well, I'd really like to meet you. I'm like, no, you don't want to do that. You stick to the books. The books are better than the person. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to say here, is that we articulate ourselves differently in different modes or different mediums. And the books are one thing, the person's another, the dream is another, the religious experience is yet another. And certainly experiences of divinity are yet another. And I do think human beings, I debated an evangelical scholar on whether Jesus was God. And my response was, of course he was God.
Right. We're all God.
So
right?
are you. So am I. And we all have experiences of deification. Well, not all of us, but there are all of these experiences in the history of religions of human deification. And I gave a few of those. And I don't think they were expecting me to say that. I think they were expecting me to be the evil liberal professor. And I was like, no.
Right.
Deification is like global.
This is the problem that I began with, which is there's too much, not too little.
Yeah.
Right. For most people that the evangelicals argue with, there's too little.
Right.
Right. For us, it's a bit too much.
Yeah.
So they're not used to arguing with that. By the way, after some reflection, I think the difference between our positions is just a matter of where we are on the stage. Because I'm sure when you were my age or younger or slightly older, you had to go through my process of seriously taking the faith on its own word and seeing if it holds. And your conclusion was that it does not hold.
Yeah, and of course I did that.
Right.
And it's not, again, that I think that the tradition or the traditions are wrong. It's just that I think that they're partial and that they give certain things, to certain communities.
Right. Fundamentalism, I think, has become quite untenable because of the tradition of historical criticism that, among others,
It was always untenable.
David Strauss, right. It's become more untenable, more obviously untenable.
Yeah.
Have you investigated into historical criticism into the Quran? Because there, the tensions seem greater, right? Like, in the same way that I can still be a Christian if you show John and Luke don't necessarily agree. I can say, well, the large message is right, but there's a bit of errancy because it's a human text. That move is not available for the Muslim because of their orthodox view of the text. So can you give an example maybe of the Quran where historical criticism has surfaced something that makes the orthodox position untenable?
Well, I'll say this. I mean, to answer your question, yes, I have looked into historical criticism in the Quran. And part of the issue or part of the problem is historical criticism comes out of the Christian tradition,
right.
The Christian and the Jewish traditions, really, and it comes out of biblical studies. And Muslims do not have that tradition, and they need to. I think that's part of the modern world, is questioning the religious text as a religious text. It's not enough to just stay inside the religion and read the text. So I just don't think that exists, in any broad fashion, where it's integral or organic to the Christian and Jewish traditions. Has been so for 220 years, I mean,
right.
I mean, we've been doing that a long time in Europe and the U.S.
So no one has yet applied that same kind of rigor to the Quran, or?
Sure, you can, but it hasn't been done to the same extent. Is what I would be my guess. I mean, I'm not a scholar of Islam, but it just doesn't exist in the same broad. So
I see. Let me read you another quote from one of your books. By Gnostic, Alan Moore means a particular kind of direct and immediate experiential knowledge of one's own divinity that cannot be reduced to reason or faith and stands very much opposed to the consensus reality of society and religion. Faith is for sissies who daren't go and look for themselves. That's my basic position. Magic is based upon gnosis, direct knowledge. You seem to have quoted So that was an
That's
Alan Moore
Alan
quote.
Moore, right?
Yeah, that's Alan Moore's quote, exactly.
Yeah.
But you seem to have quoted that approvingly.
Yeah.
My question for you is, do you think faith is a valid epistemic mode at all?
Yes, for some people, not for me. I mean, look, most human beings don't have the time or the luxury to ask questions of their culture and their tradition. And so I think faith is this sort of ascent to altered states that exist in the past. It's clearly the norm in human history. It's the norm because, again, most people don't have the luxury or the time to ask serious questions. I don't think faith is an option. It's not a pressing option for me because it requires a kind of intellectual
suspension.
Right. And I'm not willing to do that. Now that's a choice, Jonathan. That's my choice. If there are intellectuals who are willing to do that because they see that the tradition has some
reasons for them to leave.
Yeah. And I respect that. I honor that. But that is not certainly my choice, and it's certainly not my conclusion.
But Jeff, isn't that another leap of faith in the following sense?
Yeah.
That you have faith in your reason or in your direct experience, that is sufficient to grasp at the most ultimate questions in the universe. And that is, once you frame it that way, that is a statement that requires some faith. It's not clear at all why we humans should be able, through either direct experience or reason, to get at these fundamental truths, right? You certainly wouldn't say, maybe you would, a dog would be able to do calculus. Then why are we able to grasp at, through our own faculties, the ultimate truths?
So why are people able to grasp what they experience as ultimate truth in all these traditions and all these cultures? That's always the question I come back to: is why is that? And the answer of faith doesn't have an answer to that. You select, usually it's your own tradition that you happen to grow up in or you happen to be a part of, and you say that's the ultimate truth. You believe that, you have faith that that's true, but I'm just like, that's too convenient. It's just too convenient for me. And it is a position, maybe you could call it a position of faith, but for me it's a position of gnosis because it's rooted in people's experiences and people's direct experiences.
And you think, so you are making the claim that direct human experience can get at the ultimate in some sense?
Yes, I am. I am making that claim, and that's sort of the realist impulse of my scholarship, is that I do think human beings have access to ultimate truth.
What about animals? Can they have direct?
I don't know. They might as well. I can't talk to animals.
Your dog might be enlightened the whole time, actually. Yeah. That's why they're so happy.
Yeah. Listen, I don't make a distinction. There's this wonderful text that a physicist wrote, and basically he says, well, do dogs have souls? And he says, of course not, but neither do human beings. And he has this wonderful idea that there's one light and there's one form of mind, and we're all manifestations of it, that he draws from Sufism. And I'm much closer to that than I am.
Well, let's talk about that a bit, because we talked a lot about Western Orthodoxy, and now I want to move to the Eastern Orthodox traditions. Yeah. In your books and in our conversation, you've said that your metaphysics aligns a lot better with them.
It does.
So what have you taken from the non-dual traditions of Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and why don't you consider yourself like just a heretical Hindu or heretical Buddhist and practice in that tradition? And why do you still kind of distance yourself from those traditions?
Yeah, it's because, what I take from non-dualism, both in its Hindu and Buddhist and Taoist forms, is a kind of serious questioning of God and the soul. This idea that God is somehow objective, that there's some being out there that created me and that I can relate to this being, or this idea that I have a soul. These are very dualistic notions. And once you adopt a non-dual world, you no longer accept that God is external to one, or that there's something called a soul. And you can find these experiences in the West as well. These are in the mystical authors as well. So I see it everywhere. I don't see it just in the East, although it's more developed. It's more developed in Asia.
And the metaphysics aligns a lot better.
Yeah. Now, why don't I call myself a heretical Hindu or Buddhist or well, because they won't have me, and a lot of those identities require what I would think of as faith. They require me to have devotion to some guru or some swami or some lama or something. And I'm constitutionally unable to do that. I can't do that. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Why? But you did do that when you were young. Yeah, why?
It's a good question. I think I'm hopelessly democratic and individualist and Western, to be really frank about it. I think there's a serious conflict between devotion to a realized human being and this idea of the freedom of the spirit, or the freedom of the intellect to ask any question. I think there's a real conflict there. And it's not that I don't think that the human being has had an experience of non-duality or isn't realized. I'm like, yeah, you obviously are, but I still can't assent to that.
Yeah, and this is kind of a tension, or maybe an imminent. I was trained by Hegelian, so I go after these imminent kind of things. In your thought, I think there is a tension. Like, for example, how I pointed at, you do have a faith in a certain Gnostic realism. There are these premises you seem to hold, maybe just on your culture in the same way you critique others, of just being culturally relative. Yeah.
Yeah, but like my cultural convictions in the individual, or in the relevancy of asking questions. I mean, this is why I developed this sort of idea of the humanist too. I really don't take that as ultimate either.
Right.
I really don't. And I mean, I often joke, I don't believe in myself.
Right.
And what I mean by that is I actually don't believe in a self.
Right.
I think that's a cultural and grammatical construction, and I'm convinced by the arguments against it, from neuroscience to Buddhist philosophy, and I just think that's true. But that doesn't mean I'm not a human being, and I don't have an ego, and I'm not Jeff Kripal, and I'm not a professor, and I'm not here. I mean, those are all true too.
Right.
So this is why I talk about the humanist too. It's not to It's not to affirm two substances. It's just to affirm this contradiction, or this complexity of things.
Right. Yeah. So it's interesting when I tell my Christian friends about Buddhist metaphysics and emptiness and how there is no self. They say this is completely ridiculous, and I'm like, and Trinitarianism is like a piece of cake that you can just swallow without. Anyways. Yeah, this is a very classical Buddhist idea, both that emptiness itself is empty, right? As well as certainly the no self. That I would say is a very distinctly kind of Buddhist position, contra Hinduism, certainly contra the Western monotheisms. So yeah, why are you convinced of that idea?
I just see so much evidence for it.
Please.
For example, death. I mean, every human being on this planet is going to die. Life is going to annihilate the ego, or of every single person, all 8 billion people. So clearly, that's not ultimate.
Okay, but you know better than I the research coming out of UVA on reincarnation. You know very well how the soul exists in the Christian.
Well, again, so what? So you have these reincarnation memories. I understand that the ego, or the self, is that people have extraordinary experiences of it around death. And the thing about reincarnation is these are memories that children have. We don't actually know that these things exist.
Right, but come on, Jeff. Like to say that clearly you're not making the claim. Maybe you are. That physical death. It just well, this is the knockdown argument for non-self, because the Christians will say, well, the soul survives and there will be a physical resurrection.
But does it? What's your evidence for that? I mean, again,
you don't believe a soul or something survives after death.
I think consciousness survives. I'm not sure the soul. I don't think
Right.
the soul does. I don't think immortality is personal, and I do think that
Right.
there is a survival of persons, beyond death, but I don't think it's ultimate. In other words, somebody can have reincarnation memories, somebody can have a near-death experience.
Mediumship.
All these things can happen. Mediumship can happen. And I think they're all real in the sense that they actually happen. But I don't believe for 1 second that Jeff will exist, in any sense, down the pike.
Okay, well, this is a very interesting claim, right? Because again, let's take the reincarnation data where
Again, it's temporary.
Right. So it seems to me all of the phenomenon you mentioned there, and it's actually really surprising in this interview. I wasn't expecting this, which is great. It seems like the easiest explanation for all of this data that mediums talking to spirits, if you take the data seriously, the reincarnation data, sightings of dead people, is that there is some continuation of the person after death. I mean, it doesn't necessitate that.
But I think there is. I just don't think it's ultimate. I don't think it's permanent. I think there is continuation of the personality after death. But
okay, so this is just the Buddhist position then, because they also don't
this
think,
is why I joked that I think, well, maybe the Buddhists have it right. I'm persuaded by that. Just from the data and from people's experiences that I hear about over and over and over again. I'm like, yeah, the personality exists. Yes, there are reincarnation memories. Yes, there are all these phenomena, but none of that means that the self or the soul is ultimate. So, I mean, I've been to UVA, I've been to the department, and there's this whole, I don't know what it's not out like now, but when Bruce was not retired, he had all these filing cabinets behind him of near-death experiences, and you'd walk across the hallway to Jim Tucker's office. Jim's retired now too, and there were all these filing cabinets on children who remember previous lives. I'm like, well, how are those connected? Nobody knows. Nobody says. I'm like, wait, there's a one life model here and there's a multiple lives model here. What's going on?
Wait, near-death experience doesn't necessitate a one-life model, does it?
That's what they're usually assuming. And sometimes they do have reincarnation in them, of course. But we haven't got to that stage of the conversation.
Right.
We haven't even done that comparison. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And it's not like, people ask me for answers all the time. I'm like, I don't know.
You're as stuck as I am.
But let's have a conversation. Let's put the near-death experiences on the same table with the children who remember previous lives, and then let's talk.
Right. Okay, so let me ask you this. What do you disagree with the Buddhists on? Because everything you said so far, and again, there's obviously, you can say, well, I don't believe chanting, like the Pure Land stuff. There's like a core Buddhist philosophy in metaphysics. What do you disagree with them on?
I'm not so sure what I disagree with.
Wow, okay.
I don't know. I mean, this is a good question. I've never been asked this question, but I mean, there are a lot of Buddhist traditions, as you know.
Of course.
And a lot of them insist or require some kind of faith in a realized teacher, and I mean that's probably where I fail.
The practice.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And also, when I was in my Advaita Vedanta days, Shankaracharya was often called a secret Buddhist, and I suspect he was. I think that's a correct charge. I actually don't see any difference between Advaita Vedanta and Buddhist philosophy. I just don't.
Right.
And I understand that there is this distinction, of course, between the Atman or the self and the Anatta or the no self. But to me, it's kind of irrelevant when it comes to extreme human experience.
I want to push you a bit on the problem you said you have most with this kind of devotional teacher. The Western Buddhism I was taught, and I fully recognize, we're packaged by colonialism and there's a McMindfulness. The thing that I was taught was that Buddhism is different from the other religions because through your own personal experience, through meditation, through reason, you can validate the claims that the Buddha himself made. Practically, that's obviously not true because obviously you don't get the experience before you follow the teacher.
Yeah.
But do you think there's something here to that claim?
Let me put it this way. I mean, just listening to you, I'm thinking, I think human beings have experiences the Buddha never had. Okay? I mean, think about that. That's a pretty radical statement. But I just think
talking about like what, like playing video games? Like, of course, right?
No,
but you're saying mystical experiences.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that human beings have experiences, and future human beings will have experiences that none of us have had. And what you get, at least in the study of Buddhism, certainly in the US, is you get a complete denial of what I call the superhuman. You don't talk about reincarnation, you don't talk about levitation, you don't talk about rainbow bodies. But that's all in the tradition. That's like staring you right in the face. And if you really push on people, by people I mean professors of Buddhism, they'll open up and they'll say things like, yeah, I've had my first enlightenment experience reading Alan Watts or taking LSD or something. I mean, they'll get really, really weird on you really, really fast. And I'm like, okay, now we're on to this. Now we're into it.
Yeah. It is very interesting, the weird relationship religions have with the supernatural and magic, because you think they would be big fans, like look at all this stuff. But I think on one hand, there's there is on one hand, our tradition, our magic's better than yours, right? This is Moses dueling with the Magi.
Okay, let me speak in terms of Christianity, because I know the most about the Christian tradition. The problem with magic, as it's called, is that it's human. It's the human being is doing the weird shit, okay? And what Christianity declared to be a miracle is if the agency came from God, if it was outside the natural world and God did it. And the problem with magic is that humans did it. And I want to say humans did it. We're always doing it. We actually made up God, I want to say we're responsible for God. We made God, okay? So I want to reverse this is the Gnosticism. I want to reverse the claim. And, one of the things I say a lot is it's us. It's us. We did it.
Right.
And that's a suspicious claim, but it's also a deeply religious statement because it's not clear that we did it, but it's actually not clear we didn't do it.
So you make it on a leap of faith or best explanation for the data?
It always works. I have yet to find a situation where I'm like, it doesn't work. And so I just keep saying, I think it's us. I think it's us. And by us, again, I mean the humanists too. I mean, there's a part of us we're not aware of that is appearing as the dead soul or is appearing as the Buddha or Jesus or whatever. But we're having this experience. Let me put it this way. I have never, ever heard of an experience of God that wasn't told to me by a human being. Ever.
Right, but Jeff, surely you see the problem here, which is what is a counter example? What
is a counter example?
No, but don't you see you've designed the theory such that it can't be. I'm not saying everything needs to be falsified, but you see the issue, right? Like for example, let's take levitation. Okay, the Tibetans,
it's a human being.
The Tibetans, this human being, they practice, they go through walls, so they claim. But then you have, as you well know, the Christian levitators, who they get pulled up by some force. They're grabbing onto stuff.
Also a human being, by the way.
Right. And then you explain it as humanist too. There's a secret part of you, you don't know it. But your model prevents any example from falsifying. So my question is, like, what do I have to show you to convince you there is a God?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
But isn't that worrisome? Don't you see?
No, I'm not worried about it, because I don't see. Even if, the alien came down in the spaceship, well, gosh, it looks really human. It's got eyes and hands, and it's communicating,
Okay.
and I mean, gosh, it looks really, really human.
Okay, maybe this is an example. Alien spaceship comes down, USS Enterprise or something, and non-human aliens start walking down. Is that human?
Is it what?
Like non-human looking aliens start walking down, like
but it's
octopi and. Is that human? Like,
it still wouldn't bother me, because it's life. It's what life has done on some other planet or in some other part of the universe.
okay, but now you're shifting the goalpost.
Yes. So, okay, this is where I become deeply religious. So I think the history of religions is about humanity on this planet, on Earth. And when we start to relate to the broader cosmos or the broader universe, then the cosmic comes in. But I think it's the same life
force.
It's the same stuff.
Right.
It's just on a different planet, or as it were, a different star system. So I don't. To me, I don't draw a distinction.
Right. Okay, so if I were to show you like an angel, not in human form, coming down, your response would be that's
First
life,
of all,
right?
I would say that what you're calling an angel is your ideology. You just made shit up. This is an angel. That one word? You're going to call like all these beings with one word? And these are demons. Okay, now you got two words. Well, okay, what about daimons? Neither angel nor demon. What about that?
Right. The jinn, right? Yeah.
Yeah. What about the jinn? What about all these other things? And so I would turn very quickly to other cultural frameworks and want some complexity there. And why do, like, let's go back to Christianity. Why do we keep worshiping Greek terms from the 3rd and 4th century?
Like logos or
like ousios and homoi ousios and the Nicene Creed, basically.
Right.
It was completely Greek.
Right. Oh, the 3rd AD, I see.
I mean, it's literally Greek. And why do we think that human deification follows Greek grammar? Why do we do that? Why not Chinese grammar? Why not Sanskrit grammar or Arabic grammar? Of course it does. Of course it does. You just have to look at these other traditions, and it follows those languages.
I see. So before we talk about your actual worldview, and we've hinted at it already, and talk about new comparativism, I want to open up another war on another front. Not that we haven't declared war on every religious tradition, but there's someone we haven't offended yet, and those are the materialists and the scientists.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Good.
So let's talk about why you think materialism is just untenable, and maybe let's go with the empirical data. Like, what are the single instances of the most compelling empirical data, not just your own experience, but that someone could go verify that you think is, look, this just can't be absorbed?
So, first of all, I'm not against materialism or science. I don't think that they're wrong. I just think that they're inadequate again.
Right.
So that's a different claim, by the way.
No. I totally agree with you. Newton's not wrong, right? Newton's not wrong. He just doesn't have the full picture. Yeah.
Right. And Einstein's not right either. Einstein's limited. And we keep assuming presentism. We keep assuming, by presentism I mean the history of science, we just assume that our present science is the full deal. I'm like, what? Why do we do that?
Right.
And so that's my problem. Materialism often sounds to me like 19th century materialism.
Right. It's like, not even the latest physics.
It's not. I mean, you just read. The lay just read science books for lay people like myself, and you're like, this doesn't work.
Right.
This is just 19th century mechanism that is kind of silly right now.
Right. However, this is probably still the dominant kind of metaphysical view, at least in the West. So can you tell us about like some of these studies for people who don't know the reincarnation stuff, the NDE, Stargate? Yeah, to tell us about some of these.
Okay, so here's my problem thinking that the scientific method is complete or full. It has to do with non-dualism again. It's that whenever you have a scientific method, you're studying an object and the subject's doing it, and you've split it. You've already begun with a split. And it's that split that I'm really worried about, because I don't think that's really faithful to
actual reality.
Yeah, to actual reality. And again, it's not that, and the strange thing about mathematics, which is behind all the science, is that again, it's us. It's like, why does stuff that goes on in the brain, why does it correspond to material reality? Why do these mathematical equations get a person to the moon and back? That's like crazy. That is wild. Well, there's a tradition there. There's a Pythagorean and Platonic tradition there. Why the inside corresponds to the outside, and we can talk about that, and we should. So my problem with the scientific method is that it's not aware of its own history, and it's not aware of how religious and mystical it really is.
Right.
And then you get to things, I think this is what you're asking. My other problem with the scientific method is it takes a lot off the table. And it says, this is nonsense, or this is fraudulent, or this is hallucination. I'm like, those are just rhetorical bad words.
Sorry.
You've taken things off the table so that you could explain everything on the table. But the only reason you can explain everything on the table is you've just taken off what you can't explain.
Right. So what do you mean about the mystical origins of the scientific method?
Pythagoreanism, the idea that mathematics, there's this correspondence between this internal reality and this external reality. I mean that. I mean that deep, deep correspondence, or that deep, deep relationality.
Right.
And for example, in Albert Einstein, Einstein would talk about the greatest miracle is why the universe is comprehensible at all.
Yeah.
Why is it comprehensible to the human mind? Well, there's something in the human mind that is accessing and can do the physics, can do, in his case, relativity theory. Why is that?
Right. So that's the philosophical critique.
Yeah.
But what I think most people don't know is that even on empirical scientific grounds, there is just a lot of data that the kind of brute materialism is not the final story. So tell us about what you think is most convincing empirically. Yeah,
so the scientific or empirical study of phenomena, particularly around death, has been going on since the 1870s, 1880s. There's a ton of literature. Like, it's bigger than anybody can possibly read. And so anytime you get a claim like there is no scientific evidence for telepathy or precognition or whatever, that's just nonsense. It's just not true. There was a psychical research tradition in England, then there was a parapsychological tradition in the US, and it still goes on. It's still happening. And there are a lot of lame arguments about why this is sleep paralysis or why this is hallucination or whatever it is, but it's just pulling words out of the sky to just declare someone else's experience as illegitimate. And that's what I object to, is that rhetorical claim of illegitimacy that I just think is, and it doesn't mean that these are completely applicable to the scientific method. Sometimes they're not.
Right.
I want to acknowledge that too.
Right. But just give us like a concrete example in one of these traditions of one of the mediums they studied, or like whoever you think is the most compelling case. Like, give us an actual example of what they've actually shown.
I personally think the most compelling evidence is precognition. I think human beings experience the future in great detail and related in great banal detail, by the way. And I don't think we have taken that seriously because we don't think that's possible. Right. And I think it's obviously possible.
For example?
Just to take one example, Barry Windsor Smith is a young man. He's a young comic book artist. He's drawing Marvel comics, Conan the Barbarian, actually, in the early 70s. And he's living with his parents outside of London. And the comic book page disappears, and he has this vision of this office in which these people are talking, and that there's this traffic jam, and it's 3 stories up, and it's in great detail. And 3 years later, he's in that office, and it's in New York, and there's the traffic jam, and there's the person saying it, and it all plays out in perfect detail. Why? Why is that? I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why people have precognitive experiences other than to say, this is possible, the future already exists, it's already happened. But that's just one case. There are thousands of those. I mean, I get them every day in an email, by the way, too. I mean, people are writing me constantly about their extraordinary experiences.
And sometimes before the event happens, so you have the timestamps, right? Like,
Elizabeth Krohn, I mean, I wrote this book with Elizabeth called Change in a Flash, and she did use timestamps, and it involved plane crashes and tsunamis and earthquakes and things like that.
Really? So she sent you an email with a timestamp?
She sent herself. Here's the thing. Here's the thing, though, Jonathan. I actually brought in a forensic computer scientist to look at Elizabeth's computer, and he was very clear that he didn't have any evidence that it didn't happen, but he didn't have any evidence that it did.
What, the emails?
Yeah, and it's because as you buy new computers and transfer your email, it slices off the data that the forensic computer scientist needs to say if she really sent this email to herself. We have the email, we have the timestamp of the email, but we don't have the actual computer details. So there's something about what I'm trying to get at. There's something about these experiences, and this gets to the science question again too. There's something about the phenomena that's tricky, and that it's tricking us, and that is hiding itself. It's camouflaging itself. And this drives the scientists. This is where they invoke fraud. But I don't think so. I think that this is the phenomena itself is doing this.
Okay, so this is the part of your thesis that I have the most maybe problem with.
Yeah.
Your claim, if I understand it correctly, and tell me if I don't, is that these things resist being studied by the scientific method.
Yes,
they trick you, for example, by... Okay, the first question is, if an Orthodox faith believer, and go back to the first part of our conversation, said the same thing about their book, you'd be like, all right, well, that's very convenient, right? Let's say, maybe we'll take the Mormon example, that the plates happen to have gone after, that the plates resist being captured. You'd say, okay, well, that's kind of suspicious, right? Like, okay, I guess my real pushback to you, Jeff, is this, which is there are, and I'm very surprised you didn't go to this first. There are things that are studied in controlled environments.
Yeah.
Like the Duke's research,
yeah.
right?
But
there are like the remote viewing stuff.
Right. But I think when you control something with the scientific method, you make it go away.
But it doesn't go away in the Duke.
But it kind of does. You don't, the most explicit, the most robust phenomena we have is always personal testimony.
Anecdotes.
That's a bad word that scientists want to use to like lop off and take things off the table. You're an anecdote. I'm an anecdote.
Right.
So what? It doesn't mean it didn't happen. And just call something an anecdote is just to take it off the table so you don't have to think about it anymore.
Okay, so let's zero in on the Duke study, because I think that's one of the most compelling ones. Yeah.
The Duke study,
and maybe you can explain it for our audience, the background and setup.
So the Duke study was founded by a couple named J.B. and Louise Rhine, and they both had PhDs in botany, by the way. And J.B. Rhine became the kind of classical parapsychologist that he was using statistics to study things like psychokinesis and telepathy and things like that. But the thing that's so interesting is Louise Rhine was writing books on testimony. And that's where all the robust phenomena is. It's not actually in the statistics. To do the statistics, you got to be a statistician. And the data is like, if there are 100 trials, there might be 60 of them or 55 of them. But with Louisa, you have things like chandeliers are going to fall on small children, and you have mothers going to the crib and taking the child away. I mean, you have really dramatic situations in real life that involve things like precognition that you don't get in a laboratory, because the laboratory kills it, is what I'm going to say.
So there's the star candidate. So the laboratory, for our audience at Duke, what they did was cards, right? They had 5 different cards, and they asked
the
Zehner cards, if they can effectively, through whatever method we don't know, guess which card that is going to be cut up next. Obviously, you expect there's 4 cards, so you expect it to be 25%.
1 in 20, 20%.
20, because there's 5 cards. Sorry.
Yeah.
The star candidate Hubert Pierce had, as you know, over 30%.
Okay. So
it's not being resisted.
So again,
Jeff.
That's not that dramatic. It's like, that's not a chandelier. That's not a chandelier falling on a crib. You know, it's you're selecting cards.
I mean, but for a statistician, I was trained in math. Yeah. That is crazy.
Yeah,
like
okay.
35. I mean, that's like 1 in a million.
But you have to be a statistician to be impressed by that. You know, that's my point. You don't have to be impressed with the mother rescuing her child from the chandelier at 4 in the morning. You know, and the chandelier really does fall on the crib.
Right.
You get that story instantly. And so that's what I'm trying to say, is that the problem with parapsychology is that the distinctions are minor, and you have to be a statistician or a mathematician to appreciate what's going on. You do not. They're very dramatic, and they're very extreme with the quote unquote anecdotal cases.
But if your thesis is that the phenomenon resists study,
it does.
Then why doesn't it resist the statistician study? Like, surely if it resists study, as soon as you put it in the lab, it should just be 20%, no?
Well, the scientists just poo-poo the 10%. They're like, that did, you know, so what? I mean, in some ways, what I'm trying to say is, you need trauma,
right,
to invoke these extraordinary superhuman abilities. And you don't, what the scientific method does is it removes trauma, and it removes all of this real world stuff. And so it disappears.
Okay. Well, so there's 2 actually theories I'm getting from you of why this thing disappears. One is that the phenomena is conscious and it wills its own secrecy, because, I don't know, it doesn't want to reveal itself yet. That's one explanation.
Well, it does that too, by the way.
The other one is that trauma does not exist in the controlled environments. But as you know, I don't know if this is just myth, Nazi scientists did try experimenting, or people think that they did try experimenting, introducing trauma, because they don't have the ethical standards that we do. So do you think it's both of these explanations?
Oh yeah, I think it's really complicated. I think it's super messy.
Right.
I think where I think you really see extraordinary phenomena is in real world circumstances. You know, my joke is, you don't go to the North Pole to prove that zebras exist. Because if you do, guess what? There are no zebras. Because you went to the North Pole.
Right.
If you go to the sub-Saharan plains of Africa, guess what? You're going to find lots of zebras.
So let's say we don't have any complete ethics whatsoever. Can we design lab experiments to produce the significant forms of this? Or even then we can't? Maybe.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, there are movies, there are television series like that, people without any moral standards. Look, Jonathan, we'll kind of dig down into this. I think that paranormal phenomena are moral or ethical at their root, and I think it's us trying to speak to us. And I think, you know, when the example I gave of the chandelier and the crib and the baby and the mother, I don't think it's any accident at all that the mother has a bad dream about the chandelier falling on her child. I mean,
because it's important for her.
It's her child, for goodness sake. It's about reproduction. It's about survival. So I think there are survival or reproductive or evolutionary reasons for this, is what I'm trying to say. But I ultimately think it's the mother who's precognizing the event, so that she can preserve the life of her child.
Okay.
So I don't think it's God. I don't think it's not Jesus. It's the mother. But the mother's not going to own it either.
Right.
Because the dream just appeared to her.
So let me ask this question. What do you think is the most compelling data that has come out of controlled experiments? There's the Duke study, right? There's the remote viewing stuff.
Yeah,
That's pretty crazy,
first
right?
of all, I don't know the controlled studies well enough. I'm not a parapsychologist. I'm a historian of religions. Speak to Dean Radin. Speak to Marilyn Schlitz. Speak to these people would know what the controlled studies that have produced the most data. I think the remote viewing stuff which we have in our archive here, is really interesting. But again, it reveals the messiness of the situation,
right?
Because
there's a lot of failed, right? Is that
there's a lot of failures, but there's also this tension between, can these experiences be trained, or are they in unique individuals?
Right. And nature versus nurture.
I'm much more on the unique individuals, by the way. I think people are simply different. And I think some human beings are set up for these kinds of experiences for reasons we don't understand, because we haven't looked into it. Right. We haven't tried to understand. I think it has something to do with trauma. I think it has something to do with genetics. I think it has something to do with culture, obviously. I think it's really complicated.
Right.
And I don't want us to be simplistic about it.
Right. You want to keep the questions open.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, I see. So let me ask you this, and again, I'm just going to harp on the empirical stuff just because I know to a scientific audience, that's what's going to be most compelling. When you say testimony, there's actually like really strong testimonial studies, let's call it that way, of NDEs, of reincarnation.
Yeah.
Like what they found, like for NDEs, wasn't, a million patients telling the doctor, guessing the wrong thing, and then one of them got them, yeah. Right? It's like more often than not, when they tell us about these experiences, they get them right.
Yeah.
So is that fair? So Carlos Ayers' book on levitation is another great example.
Yeah.
If Cupertino didn't levitate, how do you explain all the right? So is that fair? Like, I guess I'm trying to say is, through reason alone, and by reason I don't just mean controlled stats environments. Yeah. We can gain very comfortable certainty that there's empirical.
I'm completely convinced that these things happen. I'm completely convinced that people levitated. I'm completely convinced people have near-death experiences. And I'm completely convinced we don't have a model for any of this.
Right.
At least in the academy. I know there are models for this in some of the religions, but the levitation thing is really fascinating. Teresa of Avila and Joseph of Cupertino certainly did levitate, and they believed it was God doing it. But I don't. I think it was them doing it, or some aspect of them. But again, is that really different than the God explanation? I don't know.
Right. So our audience at this point might be worried that you might be too gullible.
Okay,
so
let's talk about that.
Can you talk us about how you vet these experiences?
Okay.
Because some of your authors of The Impossible, like Valley, he did say, I seriously vetted them. I thought 90% of the UFO stuff was just wrong, right?
Okay.
So tell us about how you...
So first, let me say a few things about that issue. First of all, gullible it's like anecdote. It's like fraud. It's like sleep paralysis. You just pull it out of the air and you say you're too gullible. I do have criteria, and I do have deep suspicion, by the way. So it's not that I'm not suspicious of the experiences, but I think the experiences happened, and you can't be suspicious in this way until you say they happened. In other words, you can't say it's us until you say this person floated, or this person precognized the chandelier coming down.
But are you ever suspicious of the happening of that?
Yes.
Surely you must be,
yes.
right? There are just frauds.
I am. I do have criteria. I'm not sure they're completely conscious, but
right.
because people do fake things and they do claim that things happened when they didn't, but generally they don't, by the way. When I was first converted to this, and by converted I mean it, I guess in the religious sense, I was talking to people in the counterculture, and they told me all of these crazy things that I knew didn't happen, but I knew happened.
Wait, explain it, because you just said A and not A.
Well, they were talking about things like subtle energies erupting in their spine as they're giving birth to a child, or an orb coming out of the sky, or leaving their bodies, or some kind of psychedelic trip. And I realized we didn't have any way of thinking about those things in the academy other than fraud or exaggeration, right, or hallucination, or all these words. But that these people were not telling me these things because they didn't happen. They weren't after money. They weren't after fame. They weren't after anything. They were just sharing these things because I was a sympathetic ear, and they wanted to tell me what I think really happened to them. Now, is that gullibility? I don't think so. Do I think that what happened to them, do I honor the experiencer? The experiencer is not the authority of their own experience, as I often say.
Yeah, you honor the legitimacy of the experience, but not necessarily the interpretation.
Correct.
Right.
And the interpretation is often inside the experience, by the way.
Right.
The interpretation is part of the experience. And so I'm deeply suspicious of the experience, but not that it didn't happen.
Right.
If that makes any sense. And yes, I do have criteria. I don't listen to everybody. I don't think I'm gullible. Quite the contrary. People say to me all the time, they think I'm an atheist. I'm actually not. But I understand why they say that. Because I think their image of God or their view of whatever happened to them religiously is not true.
Right. But not in the usual way that the atheist believes.
No.
You hallucinated.
Right? I am not denying verticality or some kind of transcendence. I'm affirming it. So there's an affirmation of verticality, but there's a deep questioning or suspicion around the interpretation of that. So one of the things that this will take us, I think, into another conversation, but so I'm deeply suspicious of both the argument from religion, which is just a word that we made up again in the last few hundred years to talk about what our ancestors said about their own experiences. But I'm also deeply suspicious of science. So and this constant call for empirical proof, it's just science proving science. It's circular to me. It just goes around and around and around. So what I mean by thinking impossibly is thinking after both religion and science. And that's really hard for people.
Right. But Jeff, the reason I keep pushing you for empirical evidence isn't because I think that's the only valid mode of epistemic inquiry. It's that, again, this is my Hegelian tendency. This is the same thing as the Orthodox faith. I think the strongest thing is an immanent critique.
I know.
And I think we can show on the scientist's own grounds that it's incomplete. So let me ask you this. The miracle icon. I don't, 50%, 60, 70% chance, I don't think it's a fraud. I think it's oozing oil. What do you think is going to happen if I put it in a laboratory, cameras on it? Do you think it's going to stop?
Nothing. Nothing will happen.
You think it's going to stop?
Yeah.
The oil is going to stop?
I do.
Right. Well, that has nothing to do with trauma. So that's just the will of the phenomenon.
Well, but there's not a community there. It's not in a church. I mean, I think all of these things really matter.
Okay, what if I put the scale and brought the scientists to the church?
I don't know, but I suspect by applying the scientific method, you will make it go away.
Right, interesting. And so here's my question for you. We've given a few explanations for why things resist being studied. One is the trauma explanation, and we can test that, right, by having trauma in the laboratory. The other one is will. The thing itself resists being studied in the same way you're playing hide and seek. And the third one is maybe technology. Maybe there's something with technology that scares the phenomenon. But go ahead.
Maybe we don't want to know. Maybe we're afraid.
We are hiding it from ourselves.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not resistant to the materialist explanation, but I think it's a kind of refusal to think about the situation. But so I think the religious explanations are equally, or even more so, cop-outs. And I think we're just afraid of ourselves, Jonathan, at the end of the day.
So if your assumption is that you are dedicating your life to investigating something that resists being studied in certain ways and is very powerful, aren't you in a lot of danger? In the following sense, right? I mean, the closest analogy I have is you're an investigative journalist poking at an authoritarian government's thing that they don't want to have studied. Like, why aren't you fearful of your life? Those are your assumptions.
Here's why, and this is definitely a faith position. I think that the world or the universe is essentially beneficent or benevolent. And with a lot of paranormal phenomena, it's trying to communicate. It's trying to say things. I mean, it literally says things. Literally.
Right.
And my argument is listen, because you're listening to yourself. It's like talking to you right now, and you're trying to talk to yourself. And if you're not going to listen to this, I think it's sad. I just think that's really sad. It's like the dream interpretation. It's like when you have a dream, you need to interpret it, and you need to listen to yourself having that dream. And that is a faith statement. That's a kind of psychoanalytic conviction that the unconscious becoming conscious is a good thing. And maybe it's not always a good thing. I don't know that. But
so again, this is not a direct contradiction, but there's a tension here. On one hand, these things don't want to be examined. On the other hand, they're trying to communicate?
Yes, they are. I think so. I think paranormal phenomena are trying to speak. And to take the demon explanation, my joke is I've never met a demon that didn't look like a suffering human being. Ever. And so even the demon is trying to heal. It's trying to speak. It's trying to speak of its suffering. It's trying to speak of its whatever the trauma is. And I think by virtue of us not listening to it and not trying to integrate the trauma or the suffering into some other system, I think we're just causing it. But we're causing it to happen.
But if it wants to speak, why then does it resist being studied?
I think it resists being studied scientifically.
Why? I guess yeah.
Well, because it's not an object. It's not a material object.
It's degrading to it.
It's not dead.
It feels low integrity for you to study it that way.
Yeah. It's like you basically, by science, you mean you want to study something that's dead and insentient and behaves in a particular predictable way. And it's not. It's alive. It's minded. It's conscious. It's
right. So it's almost offended that you would treat it that way. It's something like that. Yeah.
I wouldn't speak like that, but maybe it is.
I see. I wanted to now discuss one of the most exciting ideas you had around fraud, actually. You had a 3-level defense of fraud that I found fascinating. The first is, just because fraud exists in one of these people doesn't mean we discount all of them.
Right.
The second, stronger claim is that just because this person had fraud in one instant doesn't discount their other things.
Right.
The third level is even more exciting. That practice of fraud can lead to the real magical thing.
Right.
Give us an example of the third case.
I was training to become a monk and presumably a priest. I think a lot of religious practices, you're faking it.
Right.
Until you make it.
Like prayer.
Yeah, until it actually happens. And so there you have a situation where you're engaging in a ritual or some form of religion, and you're pretending essentially that it's real or that it's happening. And at some point, it really does happen. I think the one example here is the shaman who learns a certain set of tricks to work on patients or people who are suffering from medical illnesses, but the tricks work. The person really gets healed.
And the shaman thinks it's tricks initially.
Well, the shaman knows it's a trick.
Meaning that it's a way to get some money or something like that.
Well, I'm not a shaman, but I mean, like using the guts of chickens to sort of pretend that you're pulling something out of a stomach or something,
Right. So the shaman doesn't believe initially, but then it starts working, is what you're saying.
The role of belief is fuzzy, is what I'm trying to say, and ambiguous. And like, the example I always give is the placebo effect. We know it works about 25, 30% of the time, but it's a total fraud. But it works. So there's something, it's as if the human being needs to be tricked to access its own healing abilities or its own miraculous abilities in the case of levitation or in the case of
okay, okay. So this is a slightly less exciting conclusion than I was hoping in the third case. I was hoping you would say, for example, someone would do a magic trick.
Yeah,
knowing
that's
that it's
example.
And okay, but that's different from the placebo example because that means that the magician initially knows that he's doing fraud, whereas the placebo person is fooled into it. There's a big difference there. So have there been magicians who start?
Yeah, Russell Targ. Russell talks about being a magician and performing tricks on stage and realizing that sometimes it works.
Like what kind of tricks? Levitation
like
or
mentalist tricks, like being able to read minds or something. It's been a long time since I read that biography, right?
Right.
But Russell does talk about that. And so I think, what we mean by magic today is basically stage magic. It's basically people performing fraudulent illusions. But I think the distinction between trickery on stage and something actually happening is
fuzzy.
Really, really fuzzy.
Right.
And the example that also I want to invoke here is fiction, by the way. Fiction is a word that we invented again in the probably 19th century. And the relationship between people writing stuff and people doing stuff is like really not clear,
right.
Jonathan. And people experience characters and personalities in novels appearing in real life all the time.
Right.
So what is that?
Before I had read your kind of defense of fraud or craziness, to not even then not take the data off the table, I had thought something like Mormonism I could just dismiss entirely, right? Because there's clearly issues with Mormonism. Smith is of a dubious character. It's pretty clear Native Americans aren't Jews. The papyri, the Egyptian papyri, which he said was Abraham, turned out exactly not to be Abraham. There's all kinds of failed prophecies. Right. But now I'm having second thoughts of whether I might be missing something dismissing the tradition.
Yeah.
Am I missing something there?
I think, my gut feeling is that Joseph Smith probably was having real experiences and probably was performing tricks. Probably they're both together.
Right.
I don't make these distinctions. I don't think they're separate, is what I'm trying to say. I think, particularly for religious charismatic leaders, I do think that they have experiences embedded in these acts of trickery or fraud.
Right.
And they're not always responsible. So they're not.
Okay, but let's take the strongest case where it is. Okay, let's take for example, this is one of the historical criticism. There's translation errors in the KJV that shows up in the Mormon Bible that allegedly is from this angel. Right. That to me reads, okay, this is probably not from the angel,
probably
right?
Not. Probably not.
And so that would be a very clear instance of fraud. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, I don't lie to people like that. Like my friends who are high integrity don't lie to people like that. So why are you saying, this is, I guess you're not saying this is no big deal, right? But I'm saying, compare that to a religious leader who only had legitimate experiences. Maybe they interpreted it wrong. That's a difference, right?
Yeah, I'm just saying I think the relationship is way more complicated. I'm not I'm not I'm not trying to defend someone or defend some notion of integrity or honesty. I'm saying it's complicated. It's really complicated. And that whatever this phenomena is, Jonathan, is using, we are constructing it all the time. And there are different ways to construct it, is what I'm trying to say. It's constructed, but there's a constructor, us.
Right.
And so I'm suspicious at the same time that I'm affirming, if that makes any sense.
So I'm in tech entrepreneurship. I'm also an investor as well. And I think everything we said about fraud applies to that as well. Whereas just because there are some or many frauds doesn't mean everyone is a fraud. And importantly, the same instance of fraud can exist in the actual real entrepreneur as well. And even stronger, maybe it's the act of fraud. Think about Elon saying, don't worry, the car's going to be delivered X date. It's just complete lies. But that gives the capital for the real thing to be engendered. That's the kind of model, anyways, that thought just popped into my mind, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a binary. I don't think it's fraud or legitimacy. I think frankly, that's a scientific principle that doesn't apply to this. But I think if we can talk about the phenomenon in general, it's not just human fraud. I think there's something in the phenomenon itself, and by the phenomenon I mean the paranormal weird stuff, that is tricky and that is explicitly camouflaging itself. So I don't want to just, and fraud is not being sinister, if I can say that. In other words, we deceive human beings and deceive people all the time. And so does the natural world, for reproductive reasons, for hiding, for preying. I mean, fraud is a sign of intelligence. It's not necessarily a sign of being sinister or bad. That's kind of what I want to say.
Right. But there is also sinister and bad fraud.
Of course
right,
there is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's messy.
Right. So we've talked about the first part, critique of orthodoxy. We talked about the critique of naive materialism. Now let's move to your actual theory, which is the dual aspect monism.
Yeah, so dual aspect monism basically says that there's a mental world and there's a material world that we all assume, but that they emerge from this common source, which we don't generally have access to, this unus mundus, or this one world, to speak in Carl Jung's terms. And I find that incredibly powerful, because it keeps a lot of things on the table. And the example I always give is synchronicity, where something is happening in the physical world that corresponds basically perfectly to something happening in the mental world, and there isn't a physical causal relationship between them. If they emerge from the same unus mundus,
that explains it.
That explains it to me. I mean, it's like, yeah, they correspond because they emerge from the same thing. And that same thing is neither mental nor material.
Right. So I see the advantage of this over Cartesian dualism. But what is the advantage of dual aspect monism compared to regular old monism? Like idealism, for example.
Well, I certainly assume that there's a mental world that's looking out onto a material world. I mean, dual aspect monism explains that for me. It explains that experience, that common, ordinary experience of two-ness, which I think a lot of human beings walk around assuming is the case. But what dual aspect monism gives me is it also explains the moments of unity, or those weird experiences that speak to some deeper unity that is neither mental nor material. And it also, the thing that really fascinates me about paranormal phenomena, one of many things, is that they're physical.
Right.
They're precognition.
The icon, right? That's a public physical thing, right?
It's material, but it's also mental. There's a meaning that's being communicated through this material object. And this is why I kept saying to you, I don't really have any problem with materialism. I just think it's incomplete, Because I think there's this whole other mental world, and then there's this unus mundus below the two that I think is even more interesting.
Does this position commit you to a kind of panpsychism?
It does.
So this chair is conscious in some sense.
The chair is a material object, but there's a mentality that's perceiving it, and deeper down there is no distinction. So
I see. The chair is not conscious.
Yeah, right. But deeper down in some other realm, the distinction between the mental and material does not exist.
Right. So one view of panpsychism states that an atom is conscious and the chair is conscious, but you're saying it's almost like we are the ones who are making the chair conscious, or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm saying, Jonathan. I mean, this is why I don't have any problem with science. It's the mental perceiving the physical or the material and performing all kinds of mathematical equations on it. But there's always a mental kind of material relationship here. And what I'm trying to say is there's something below that or deeper than that explains the science and the materialism.
So what you've defined as the split from the one to the two as a kind of splitting, and we humans are the splitters. Yeah. This is a Kantian move in some sense, right? Yeah. You're almost saying a transcendental prerequisite of consciousness is this splitting function.
Yeah.
Why? Like, why? I mean, obviously you don't have the full answer.
I don't know why. Why do we split? Well, obviously it's very useful for us to split the world into two. We've reproduced and survived that way. So I don't know why we do that. I just know that human beings have moments where there's no splitting.
Okay, so this is what I want to push you on here in the theory, because if you're saying a transcendental prerequisite of consciousness is the splitting, there are moments of consciousness where there's no splitting.
No, I'm not saying that. I never say that.
Right. You're just saying it's the most likely, most common mode.
I'm saying that human beings have an experience of the world that is neither mental nor material, and they can access the unus mundus in these mystical states. I'm not saying that those mystical states are useful or moral or even religious. I'm just saying people have those experiences, and that this is what reality is, deep down.
Why do you take those experiences as not just some heightened form within the splitting, but as unifying with the one?
They're clearly neither mental nor material. That those categories don't even work.
Right. Can you give an example? Yeah.
I'm just thinking of something I just wrote. So there's a woman named Dina Bazar, and she's dying of cancer, and she's given a psychoactive substance, actually, and she says, basically, she said she loses all fear of death because there's nothing to die anymore, and she says it's not as if I'm looking out on the world or the universe. I am the universe. I am it, and there's no death. So that to me, that is a non-dual experience, because the subjectivity, objectivity is completely broken down. It doesn't compute anymore. Because when we think of death, we think of a subject or a person ceasing to exist. And what she's saying is there is no person there. There is none. And the universe itself is alive and is this one thing, and death is nothing. Death doesn't mean anything.
Right. So
that breaks our head. That breaks our because we think in our grammarizes or we language in dualism. We assume that there's a subject looking out on an object. We just assume that.
Right.
And I'm interested in these states where that's actually not true.
Okay, so here's my next question, which is, let's say your interpretation of that state is correct, of a monism. What makes you a dual aspect monism instead of a one aspect dualist, in the following sense? Because you prioritize the mystical state of unity ontologically over the dual state.
I do.
But what part of the data makes you prioritize that? Why not flip it on its head? that the real is a duality, and then insert.
This is why I think I'm deeply religious.
It's a faith. It's a faith.
Yeah, because part of it is that the people who have had these experiences come back from them and say, "This is what life is all about. This is the goal. This
is your Gnostic realism.
This is it. This is the ultimate telos of all existence. That." And I, maybe I'm naive, but I'm like, yeah, they're right. That I believe that, But it's not that I exist in some kind of non-dual state. I don't. I'm terrible at it. I'm terrible.
Me too. I can't meditate. I've gone on a few retreats. I can't even stop talking, and so I'm just hungry all the time.
Me too. Welcome to the club again. But I don't care. Because I really don't matter, Jonathan. I really don't. I'm like Dinah dying. I'm like, does it matter? It's like, who cares what Jeff thinks or what he does? It's like, it's irrelevant.
So what troubles me in part of your explanation of the supernatural phenomenon is if it was all radioactive raccoons, talking mantises, and UFO apparitions that don't have a clear religious bent, okay, I can kind of make sense of that. But a lot of these phenomena, they show up in very clearly religious forms.
Yeah.
Like the icon.
They do.
Like seeing Jesus, like seeing Buddha.
They do.
Why?
Because that's how it camouflages itself, and that's how the person can understand it.
Right.
And again, I think it's us.
Okay, but let me challenge you in this way. A naive interpretation of what you're saying, you might disagree with this, is that our beliefs, our cultures shape how these events show up. But then how do you explain where, for example, the Christian doesn't see the Christian afterlife in near-death experiences, right? It also goes against our beliefs.
I know, it doesn't. That's why I love near-death experiences. They often don't agree with their social surround.
So how do you explain?
Well, I think the human being, in truth, is none of these religions. I think these are all our stories, and we're none of them. And so when a religious experience happens that cannot be reduced to the social surround, I'm like, see, I told you, you are actually not Jewish. You are actually not a Christian or a Catholic. You're actually not a Buddhist. You think you are. Okay, you think you are. Okay, play that game for however long you want, but you are not it. You are not your story.
Right, but I'm not bringing up this empirical data point to talk about that part of the argument. I'm bringing it to challenge your claim that it is our beliefs and our cultures that shape it.
But that isn't always successful. I don't think that always works. And I think what a paranormal experience often is it's a communication inside a story saying, this story isn't working so well.
Right. So sometimes it's pro the story, sometimes it's transgressive, depending on what's needed.
This story will tell itself, or it will reflexively challenge itself, and it'll jump out of itself, and it'll make fun of itself. And I'm like, that's because it's a story. It's actually not ultimate.
Right.
Let me give you an example of this. So just a really kind of banal example. So I was with a loved one once, and this person was suffering emotionally a lot because of something that happened. And I said to this person, can't you see that you're not your emotion? Can't you just step back and not? And the loved one looked at me and, what do you mean? The person couldn't do that. Absolutely could not do that. There was zero separation between the emotional response and the person. And as an educator, as a human being, I think that's a really bad idea. I do not think we're our emotional responses. I do not think we're our cultures. I do not think we're our religions. I want to affirm the human being beyond all of those things.
Yeah, you had this beautiful analogy about these paranormal phenomenon as Minerva's owl. And if you relate to it the right way, it'll give you wisdom. If you relate to it the wrong way, you're the owl's prey.
It'll eat you.
what can one do, asking for a friend here, to get the good experiences? Is it the right belief? Is it the right disposition? Like practically, how do I prepare myself so that if something happens, it's not getting anally probed by an alien, it's getting wisdom from the owl?
I think we have to have compassion. I mean, that sounds very Buddhist, doesn't it?
Right.
I don't mean it in a Buddhist sense, though. I think we have to have compassion on each other, and we have to have compassion on ourselves. And I think when these things show up, we have to have compassion on what shows up too. And I think that's the best response to these things is frankly a kind of loving listening, if I can put it that way, and not a dismissal. This is why, again, I object so much to the dismissal or the demeaning of these things, because I think it's morally bad. I think it's really the wrong way to interact with these situations.
So let's take one of the most scary phenomenon that you take seriously, which is alien abduction.
Well, let's take it.
Maybe they're not alien, but they're perceived as such.
I actually know a lot about that.
Yeah, alien abductions, and the story usually goes, it's frightening, there's usually some sexual stuff going on, they're anally probed, and they get examined by doctors who say, well, we don't know what happened. Or there's a little device installed in their ears. You're saying if you go with the flow, so to speak, when that happens to you, how will the event change?
My advice to the person who's had those experiences, first of all, that those things really happened. To affirm the experience itself, I think, is a moral act.
Right.
And I think it's really important. And by those things happen, I mean, they really happened. The person really had those experiences. And those experiences sometimes morph into something very positive. They don't always. And all of that needs to be listened to and taken into account. I think we should take that all seriously. We should take the negative, terrifying aspects as seriously as we take the positive, transformative aspects, but we shouldn't separate them. Because they might go together too.
Got it. You're not saying if the person is open to the experiences, the anal probing alien will transform into a beautiful event, but you are saying even the negative event, you can interpret it.
What I'm saying too is that affirming that really happened, it's more likely that will then morph into something transformative and positive, but it may not, and it doesn't always do that. But that the negative, terrifying experience is as much an experience of this other realm as the positive, transformative experience. That they're really both genuine and actual and real. And that the negative experience, it might be the response of the human being having it. This comes up with negative near-death experiences too. Why the negative near-death experience? Why the experience of hell? Is it really because there's a hell? Or is it because that the person is not ready for that, is not ready for ego dissolution or whatever the case might be? I mean, in other words, to see terror as a human response to infinity and not as that the presence is evil or something.
Yeah. So your explanation for these events is that it's us trying to communicate to us in some sense.
And sometimes that doesn't work, by the way.
Sometimes that theory doesn't work.
No, sometimes it doesn't work.
Right, the communication fails, you're saying. Oh, of course, as communication always fails sometimes.
Sometimes sometimes trauma is really a bad thing too. I don't want to romanticize trauma. I mean, look, some of us self-destruct, and some of us, we don't respond well at all to mental illness or to medical challenges.
Yeah, so the Tibetan saint who levitates on his own will versus the Christian saint who feels an experience pulled by something else. Like, yeah, they seem like distinct phenomenon, yeah.
So this is where my historical criticism comes in. I suspect that the Tibetan saint doesn't will that.
Oh, you think the stories of them flying at their own will and trying to...
I want to read.
You want to problematize it a bit.
Yeah. I don't think just because a text comes down to us or a story comes down to us means it's true.
Right.
or it happened. I shouldn't say true. I don't think it happened that way necessarily.
And when you say it's us trying to talk to us, is it always the same person in a future or past time talking to themselves, or it could be humans in general? You don't know.
I don't know. It's like, I think we're tapped into this larger kind of superconscious mind. But then we're also these social egos or these identities. And I think both of those are true.
Right.
And it's not always pretty. It can be really messy too.
Right. Back to the empirical question, I remembered something that I always get asked when I bring up this phenomenon, which is, why have these events stopped happening since the invention of smartphones and cameras? I imagine you're going to say because it resists being captured, or because it's not the trauma thing, right? Like, you can just capture trauma.
Well, I don't think it has stopped, but I think we live in a very different culture. I mean, I think it's a good question. Why was levitation so prominent in the 17th century, but it's so rare in the 21st? And, I think we live in a much more buffered scientific culture where things are possible or impossible in a very different way than they were in the 17th century. I'm kind of an idealist at the end of the day. I mean, I really do think that culture and worldview determines what's possible and impossible.
Right. So people do have videos of people levitating; they're just not being taken seriously. Or you're saying they're just not levitating.
First of
anymore.
all, people do levitate today in things like possession, or things like alien abduction. They report levitation all the time, but on camera, not so much. But I suspect there are such things. But I don't know. I'm not a parapsychologist.
Okay. So
I don't know the photographic evidence.
This is another place where I sense a tension. I'm going to quote another one of your paragraphs from The Secret Body. The new comparativism works from the present to the past.
Yeah.
More specifically, it zeroes in on the anomalous experiences of contemporary individuals and the phenomenology of paranormal or imaginal events, both empirical and symbolic, in order to better understand the anomalous experiences of past individuals and communities and how these were remembered, textualized, disciplined, and so fashioned into the institutions, scriptures, mythologies, and ritual systems that eventually became religions.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's your methodology, that seems in tension with what you just said before, which is that a lot of these supernatural phenomena are historical. And so you run the risk in, for example, dismissing levitation. Historically, if you just project back, what happens today?
So I don't think that these things stop happening. I just think that they're not picked up by the culture and received in the same way. For example, when somebody floated in the early 1600s, it was a sign of sanctity, or it was an object of the Inquisition. When they float today, it just didn't happen. It's fraud, or you want empirical proof of it, or whatever. There are all these ways of dismissing it and really not taking it up in the culture.
I totally agree with you there. Do you also agree that the miracle happenings themselves also might be historical?
Yeah, I do. And I see the tension you're talking about. I just don't think it's an absolute tension. I think things still happen today that we can use to do better history, or to do better anthropology. I think it's a matter of, look, just because you can't create an absolute pure surgery room doesn't mean you operate in gutter.
Right.
There are degrees. There's a kind of relativity here, or kind of degrees of antiseptic purity in this case. And I think there's degrees. I think things like this do happen today.
Right.
Abductions happen, possession happens, levitation happens, precognition happens, telepathic communication happens. All of the near-death experiences happen, but it doesn't happen the way it would have in the 14th century. Let me just say something about near-death experiences. I mean, I think that whole language and that whole literature depends on medical technology, by the way. And the development of medical technology in the last 50 or 60 years. Because I think in the 14th century or the 15th century, lots of people had near-death experiences, but they just died.
Right. So this is a reverse case where it's taken more seriously in modernity because it's captured in modernity.
Yeah, it is a reverse case. And I think today we just hear way more stories because people are further into the death process and we pull them back.
When I think about this one world, this realm of mystical, whatever you want to call it, it seems like we can say something about its nature. One thing I want to say is that it's semantic over physical. That what we see aren't blobs of goob popping up around us that's completely meaningless. It's meaningful. It's trying to communicate. The second thing I want to say is that it seems to be organic rather than mechanical.
Yeah.
Organic meaning that it has a purpose. It is a will. It is a fit. It is an agent. It is a person.
Right.
It's not laws, which might explain why it doesn't want to be studied. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. It's minded. It's life. I don't think a lot of our science is appropriate here or set up for this. That science is great at studying dead objects. The deader something is, the better. But when it's alive and intentional and willed, it just falls.
Right.
It just
Yeah. And for that, we need the humanities, which is your super humanities thesis, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But today, I think I want to wrap up this interview to talk about ethics and what this means for how we should live. The first, I think, most obvious ethical demand this realm might make of us is to study it, to do what you're doing.
To listen.
To listen. And my first objection, concern is, most of these mystics that you bring up in your books, maybe also the scholars of mystics, they don't end up well. They're persecuted, they go crazy, they commit suicide.
Right.
That seems to be reason alone, maybe enough to not want to study this more. I'm trying to make a red pill, blue pill kind of decision here myself, right? So tell me about that.
Well, first of all, most of literature, the main figures, it doesn't go so well. It makes better stories if the heroine or the hero's messed up.
But you're documenting real people here, real scholars.
Yeah, but of course, the literature, I think, is based on real life too. And again, this goes back to what I call the traumatic secret. I really do think that there's something about trauma that induces these experiences.
Do you think it's certainly not sufficient, but do you think it's necessary, trauma?
I don't think it's necessary, but I think it's often the case. And I think that's why you see so many of these cases it not going well, as you say.
Right.
And also, I think the cultures and the societies are set up often against these experiences because these experiences are challenging or deconstructing society in a way. So I think there's a kind of reason for the resistance. But I think that's why, a lot of these don't end up so well.
Well, even an example of people who maybe haven't been that traumatized, just looking at the power they develop, I'm thinking about the lightning example or the comic book writer example. It's striking to me that they want the experience to stop.
Yeah, that's the traumatic secret again. They don't.
But they weren't traumatized before, or the event itself is traumatizing, in addition to whatever trauma that exists before.
So like with Elizabeth, I can speak the most to Elizabeth Crone, that's her name, and Changed in a Flash is the book. And she was struck by lightning in 1988, and she had all of these paranormal abilities, particularly all of these precognitive experiences. And she definitely wanted them to stop. And she still...
Why, actually? Why?
Well, for one thing, all of the precognitive dreams are of bad things happening. There's not a good thing in it.
Right.
And so, and there's sufferings. Why do you want to see a plane crash, or why do you want to see an earthquake or a tsunami? You don't. And so there's something really natural about wanting these things to stop. There's been a lot of conversation, a lot of literature around why they're negative. And again, I think it probably comes down to they serve an evolutionary purpose. If the mother dreams of the chandelier falling, the chandelier fell. She's not dreaming of unicorns and angels and happy things. She's dreaming of something really bad. But that dreaming of something really bad allows her to save her child from something really bad happening. And so I think there's an evolutionary purpose in the negativity of the events, is what I'm trying to say. And that's kind of where a lot of the literature goes. Because people generally don't have these experiences around happy events.
Right. So I, right now as a seeker, I'm trying to decide whether I continue, whether I stop. There's an interesting question whether I can stop, I think. But I think let's examine the normative question. And here would be my pitch to take the blue pill, which is, if in addition you say blue pill, red pill, truth, you stay in the matrix, you say, by the way, everyone who takes the red pill ends up depressed and unhappy and live bad lives. And everyone who takes the blue pill, they live fine. That changes the calculus of which one to take. In fact, I'm going to bring in both of ours. I'll speak for me, one of my favorite authors, Nietzsche. And one of my favorite books of his, Nietzsche, Untimely Meditations, right? Yeah. And in it, he essentially asks, what is the value of truth? And it's not a question that most academics ask. They think, well, it's just an imperative, moral obligation to pursue the truth. And I think he convincingly shows, no, truth must be judged on its effects for life. This, by the way, is one of the reasons I didn't do grad school. I saw all the grad students were depressed. I mean, it was also Columbia, so they were doing a lot of critical theory, and so that might be the reason why. But I do think truth is not a exhaustive, normative obligation.
Yeah.
And so how should I respond to this?
Yeah. So I once wrote an essay. It was called The Purple Pill. And I had this student, it was this moment teaching, and there was this footnote in an essay that was about a sexual scandal around a spiritual teacher. So what I'll say about it.
There's a lot of those, yeah.
Oh, there are a lot of those. And this spiritual teacher happened to be the spiritual teacher of her own family. Mm. And so she was really disturbed, I think, by this. And I said to her, okay, you can write your essay for the class around this footnote and the literature around this, but you don't have to. And I said, don't tell me now. You can tell me later. And she looked at me and she said, oh, you're offering me the red pill or the blue pill, aren't you? And I was like, I suppose I am. And then the class went on, the course went on, and I could tell she was somehow different. She was asking different kinds of questions. And I went up to her and I said, you took the red pill, didn't you? Or, and she kind of smiled. She didn't answer the question, by the way. And so I wrote this essay called Taking the Purple Pill, because I think that's what most human beings do, is they take the blue pill, but they also take the red pill. They take a little of both.
Conventional and ultimate.
Yeah.
Clark Kent and Superman.
You're right. Yes. And that's the humanist too again. And that's certainly what I've done. And they combine them. And so that would be, I guess, I don't know if that's advice, but that's what and just knowing you, Jonathan, just this brief time together,
I can't stop.
You're going to take the red pill. You've probably already taken it. And but the blue pill's pretty good too. And you're probably going to take both of them.
Right. So the answer to should one explore this path is, in my case at least, there might be no decision because I can't stop. But the practical advice is, don't forget to take the blue pill as well. Right. Don't forget to still maintain normalcy.
Right.
Yeah. How do you weigh experience of the one, mystical experiences, with normal conventional experiences?
I don't think they're compatible, by the way. I think experiences of the one, when you talk to the experiencer, you'll get this is the goal of human life. But I don't see how that feeds into judgment or eschatology. I mean, I suppose it can. And it might fit into some kind of non-dual soteriology, but I think there's a tension there. I think there's a real tension because the experience of the one, there's often a complete collapse of temporality. By the way, it's not that there is some kind of future that you're moving towards is that it's eternity. It's already perfect. It's already the past, the present, the future already exist.
Right. Okay, but do you take the people to be right when they say this is the telos of life? I mean, what they are saying is they're effectively saying everything else is instrumental to this, right? They're saying everything, artistic pleasure, recognition, family, that is second to this. Did you agree with that?
I don't agree with anything. I mean, I want to put their experiences on the table, Jonathan, but I don't want to say that's the goal of all of human life.
Right.
I don't know personally, and I don't think they know. But I think if we put everybody on the table and we line up all of these human experiences, we're going to get this richness. We're going to get a plurality of how to have a human life. We're not going to have a singular answer.
So you had a mystical experience yourself, most famously in Kali.
Yeah.
And for you...
But I don't think that's ultimate.
Okay, you don't think... You think that was a... This is going to really degrade it, like cool experience. That was one of many cool experiences. Is that too much?
I think what drives me to this day to write books. I don't think it was just a cool experience. I think it was definitive for this particular human life. But I don't think it doesn't demand anything of other people.
Right. Nor yourself to recreate that.
No. I've tried to recreate it. I failed completely. I mean, it's not going to happen.
Right. So...
And it probably shouldn't happen. Probably doesn't want to happen.
So I interviewed Dale Allison, who's a friend of yours.
Yeah.
And I think your position much more intellectually consistent, because I kept pushing him, like, why are you still within the tradition? And the only compelling answer I really got from Dale was, it's because of the practice. It's because there's a community, there's a tradition. What is your practice? Do you have a practice?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. So I don't want to speak for Dale, but I think Dale's answer is he wants community and he wants a tradition. I don't valorize my own decision to not have a tradition or not have a community. I think it's very lonely. And I don't, and it may be the wrong answer, by the way. I mean, I'm wrong. It may not, it's certainly not right for everyone. If I have a practice, and I do, it's writing.
Right.
And I don't understand writing, as you know, in a banal or ordinary sense. I understand writing and inspiration as a kind of paranormal activity from the future. And it's definitely how I interpret the Kali experience today. What I think happened in 1989 with the Kali event was that all of the future books somehow downloaded into me.
We'll have an entire interview just dedicated to this idea of writing as mystical experience, and not just as documenting mystical experience. And this, I think, explains one of the most curious things about your life, which is, surely, if you believe in these experiences, you would just be a mystic instead of a scholar of mysticism. In the same way that it's weird to be a child who wants to grow up to be an NFL commentator. Yeah. Right? Most children want to be the quarterback or the linebacker or the wide receiver.
Which I wanted to be a quarterback.
Right. And so, but your answer is that you are a mystic, that writing is your mystical practice.
First of all, I just don't have the constitution to be a mystic, and
why is it?
I don't know why. I honestly don't know. But I've been around truly charismatic people who are, radioactive in the metaphorical sense, and I'm like, whoa, that's
not me.
It's not me, but wow, they're different, and I'm not that. And so Jonathan, I'm okay being a writer. I have access through the writing and through the books and through the experiences to other people's experience, to these experiences. I am not a mystic or a magus or a great experiencer in any sense. I'm just not. But I can help experiencers, and I can help authorize this space by doing this writing.
Right. So again, I want to lay out a few kind of orthodox, one of them is unorthodox positions of how people have valued mystical states relative to other goods in the world that most people know, like family or artistic achievement or recognition, money, pleasure. One idea, and this is core to, I think, to the Gnostic traditions, the mystical traditions, that this is the end all be all, right? Like this is the telos of life. Another, I think that's actually not the Orthodox religious tradition, right? The Orthodox religious traditions often say these things are good and valuable, but this is not the point. Like even the Buddhists warn against getting stuck in the yanas, and the Christians certainly do. Then there's a third, I don't want to use New Agey, but there's a third, more radical position that says this is just a cool experience. Like in the same way, if you never had sex in your entire life, you'd say, that sucks, man, that you never had that. But that's not, you can live a great life without that. And this is just like that.
Yeah.
And your position 3?
Not really, no. I'm obsessed with religion, obviously, Jonathan. I mean, I spend my whole life thinking about it. I'm much more that this is what a human life is about.
Your position 1.
Yeah. I mean, but I don't, look, I've tried so hard to be that mystic or that saint, and it didn't work. And I'm fine with that now. I really am.
This might be really helpful for me because I've always had, you mentioned you want to be a monk. I've been thinking about monasticism for a long time, but kind of like you, I just suck at it. Like I just suck at meditating, and I'm pretty good at the intellectual stuff.
Yeah.
And so
do that.
But to your point, isn't the purpose of life? Am I taking a worse option here? Am I taking like, I guess I can't be a quarterback. I'll just be an NFL commentator.
Well, I didn't become an NFL quarterback for obvious reasons too. I mean, I think this is, I often talk about my la-di-da nature. And by that I mean, I am generally happy, and I look at things from the bright side, as it were. But this means ignoring a lot of things, which, by the way, I can't change. But it's a certain attitude towards life, I think, that you're really asking about. And I just think pursuing something constantly that isn't going to happen and that you're not going to be is self-defeating.
But that's what I'm saying. Is your self-conception like, number 1, this is a lesser tier, I'm going to use the word human because you think this is the telos of human existence. But number 2, this is the best I can do, and I'm going to be great at that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess it's more the position. I mean, I learned this from the Hindu tradition, but also my own Catholic tradition. People are just different.
Right.
And they have different skill sets, and some are oriented towards jnana or the intellectual life. Some are more oriented towards bhakti or devotion. Some are oriented more towards yoga or spiritual practice, or some people have a vocation, some people don't. But I really don't think I have that vocation, or I'm just not that person, and I'm totally okay with that right now.
Of the people who are those people, who have that mystical disposition, who are radioactive in the way you said they are, does it demand a kind of renunciation, literal or at least psychological, of the classical worldly goods?
Again, I think it just depends. I think this is where I'm Nietzschean. I think we're transitional. I think we're kind of feeling our way towards a new era, towards a different kind of orientation. I think, personally, Jonathan, I think you are on the vanguard of the future. And I think this being a mystic is also being a believer. It's being this traditional kind of religious person. I think that's in the past. And I know there are some people who are oriented that way, but I think they're looking towards the past for the truth, and I think we're looking towards the future for the truth. And I think that turning around is fundamentally different. And I think what I speak for myself now, certainly what I have invested in is I don't think any of our former answers work anymore, particularly the religious ones. And I'm oriented now towards answers in the future that don't exist yet, that I don't have yet, and that's a good thing.
Okay, but when you say that I am on the vanguard, that is in contradiction to your claim that the telos of life is this thing, no? Because I'm not on the vanguard.
Well,
I'm commentating on Tom Brady's throw.
Well,
I'm not doing the throwing.
Well, but you're also life, and you're also pushing these questions in a way that a religious person couldn't do and a straight intellectual person couldn't do. So that to me is like really significant. That's kind of what I'm meaning. That's when I say you're on the vanguard. And I mean that. I mean that in a special sense too. In an evolutionary, I don't have a problem with anthropocentrism, by the way. I think the future is anthropocentric. I think we are I think that's the way it is. And so when I say you're on the vanguard, I mean to affirm your questions because I'm affirming myself, obviously, too. Here.
Yes.
But I really do think most intellectuals, I won't say all, but most intellectuals, they really do think that they know more than their ancestors. I don't know why you would do this. I have no idea why you would do this. If you didn't think that more knowledge was possible, then why are you in this? Why are you in this game?
Right. So then it becomes a careerism, or yeah. So okay. Let me ask you slightly change the topic of conversation about the guardrails of exploring this realm. On one hand, we clearly don't want to say what all of the Orthodox traditions say is demonic. Yeah. Mediumship in Leviticus, strictly banned, right? Yeah. But we also want to avoid the opposite extreme of anything goes. Yeah. If I come to you and I say, hey, I'm going to draw like a Satan star here, I'm going to start doing all this crazy stuff, I'm going to sacrifice a baby goat and summon the demon, you'd say, yeah, probably don't do that, right? So without an Orthodox tradition about guardrails, how do we stay safe while we investigate?
The reason I'm suspicious of guardrails is the same reason I'm suspicious of spiritual direction, as it was called in my early life. It's a good way to keep you in the tradition.
Okay, but clearly, let's say I tell you this right now. I'm going to draw a Satan circle right now. I'm going to sacrifice.
First of all, Satan is just us again.
Okay, I'm going to try to summon a demon here. Okay, let me ask you this. Is there any mystical practice I can do that you say, Jonathan, probably don't do that?
Don't hurt anyone.
But other than that, all bets are off. Have at it.
Listen, I think so. I mean, I don't know where I would draw the line, Jonathan.
Hold on. Is this because of your fundamental belief that
it's human
and it's benevolent us. And it's benevolent?
Yeah.
Right.
And I've thought about this quite a bit, actually. So I often teach in the public realm, and I often do workshops, and people want me to do experiential things. And I'm really resistant to that. And I thought about, well, why? Why am I so resistant? And it's because I don't think it works. I think that's the deepest reason. I don't think it works.
Guardrails or?
No, practices in a workshop. I don't think you can do something for a weekend and have any result whatsoever. I think any practice done over a long period of time probably will have some results sometimes. But again, I think it depends on the person doing it.
Right.
And I really do think people are very different. And some people like Kundalini experiences. Some people just have Kundalini experiences. Other people do not.
Yeah, I'm very thick to this stuff.
Me too.
Yeah,
me too.
Yeah.
I'm a thick.
But you got your. I feel jealous. Yeah, you got your experience.
But I was very sick. I was medically sick, and I was in another country, and I was surrounded by a wild set of rituals and texts. And it was great. I was also young, by the way.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
I better hurry up. Okay, so let me ask one more question here about Dale and his recent book, Encountering Miracles. He clearly distinguishes between an exposure to some fundamental good and just feeling of sheer evil in this mystical realm. People reporting, I have felt sheer evil. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's this Manichaean thing going on in this realm, or do you think, no?
I don't think so.
And you think it's fundamentally all good? That's an even stronger claim.
I mean, I don't want to question people's experience of evil, but I would want to hear more about that. And my joke, I've never met a demon that it doesn't look like a suffering human being. I suspect the evil is because of some form of suffering.
Why do you believe the world is ultimately benevolent, or is that just a faith claim?
Why do I? I don't know.
That's just a faith claim, right?
Yeah, that's definitely.
Are you satisfied by that? I mean, take your own comparative, critical lens. Are you?
It just seems that way. To me, looking at history and reading a lot of people.
Really,
Yeah.
The world wars. It seems that way.
Well,
you look at the Aztec. It seems that way.
I mean, yeah, I do. I do think that.
Why? How is this not just your imported Christian priors or something?
Maybe it is.
But come on, you're the one who's hermeneutics of suspicion and poking out at everyone else's bubble. Like, why are you not more troubled by this?
Because I think when human beings really try to access these realms, they experience something beneficent. They don't generally experience World War II or the Holocaust, for example. I think that's people doing that to people. I get that.
Right.
But when human beings access this humanist II, this other realm, I think it often, not always, but it often is very, very benevolent.
Right. But then you only sustain that in the data by reading a theodicy into the bad experiences, because you know as well as I do that people see demons. You know as well as I do that there's UFO and people are hurt. But then you say, well, those have a pedagogical function, and so there's a little theodicy. And what I find another tension in your review is, on one hand, you treat the one as benevolent, as good, and we talked about the kind of cultural reasons for that. On the other hand, you comment that these experiences are transmoral.
Yeah.
You also say that, this is clearly true, that there are great saints who are terrible people.
Yeah.
How do those two things square?
Again, when I say something's transmoral, I don't mean it's bad. I don't mean it's evil. I mean, it's literally not an ethical or a moral thing. I think moral categories are often social categories. They imply a subject and an object, or lots of individuals. And I don't think those things even exist in the one or in these kinds of experiences. So I just think applying moral categories to these experiences is just...
But you do say the one is good, fundamentally good.
I don't mean good in a moral sense.
Right.
I mean
like
it's life.
Affirming sense, right? A deep ontological affirming.
I mean, the one is life. The one is the universe. The one is the cosmos. There's something affirming and life affirming in the one itself. But I think this is the problem with theodicy too. I think a lot of theodicy questions imply that we are the center of the universe and that we're somehow at the apex. And I just don't believe that. I just think we're part of this larger ecosystem, and human beings do a lot of horrible things and bad things, and I'm speaking morally to other human beings, but that's where morals and ethics, I think, are appropriate.
On the conventional layer,
yes.
Yeah. One derivation of the one, or consciousness being connected in some sense, is veganism.
What?
Veganism, vegetarianism.
Yeah.
That doesn't fall. That doesn't flow for you. Yeah.
So vegetarianism, at least religiously speaking, is often for moral reasons, but it's often also used to classify hierarchies and social systems. And so I'm just innately suspicious of drawing distinctions between what one eats, because you're also drawing distinctions between classes and people as well when you do that. And I'm suspicious of vegetarianism like I'm suspicious of everything else. I mean, I think people who eat plants, there's a consciousness in plants too, or there's a life force in plants. And they would say there isn't as much life force or there isn't as much consciousness in plants as there is in animals. Okay, that's one way to draw the line, but I just
you're destroying in either way. Yeah.
I think reality is built on predation. I think that's what it is. I think the life cycle is one species eating another, and I don't think there's a way out of that.
Right. Let me actually read you a quote, actually, where you articulate this perfectly. This, anyway, is my philosophy of suffering and evil. In other words, a theodicy. I think the little social self of the human is pretty messed up and will inevitably mess up other little social selves and actually must mess up other forms of life to survive, as in eat them. The truth is that as individual bodies or souls, we have to kill things in order to live, whether those are intelligent plants or animals, regardless of what those who wish otherwise want to wish or believe. I'm sitting here right now, my white blood cells murdering countless tiny infectious organisms just so Jeff can stay conscious and upright, just to tap out these few lines. This is your kind of theodicy. The one is good in a deep ontological affirming sense. The two is messed up for reasons we don't know, but it clearly is. And that's not a get out of jail free card for every bad act, but it's reality that we have to live with.
Yeah, and I mean, even something like the Christian sense of everyone's forgiven, to me, I read that in a non-dual way. I mean, I think everybody is part of this one where being forgiven, it literally makes no sense.
Right, because there's no one to be forgiven,
yeah,
right?
There's no one to be forgiven. There's no one to forgive. It's just irrelevant.
I think your theory, it's interesting. Remember early in this conversation when I pushed you about the Tibetan masters levitating and you challenged whether it was them willed versus being done upon them? You seem to interpret all of these phenomenon as something else communicating to the person, as being done on them. But clearly there are people who have controlled these powers, right? I'm
not so sure.
Really? You don't think the remote viewers, they've controlled, you know?
Again, I'm not of the position that you could train these things. I think these are essentially wild talents. I think there are degrees of this. Yes, people can call on these things and do them, but I think those are very special people. I think there's a kind of gift there that is then trained.
But just to be clear, not all paranormal phenomenon are done upon you. There are some that are initiated by people.
I think the robust ones are done upon you. I think the non-robust ones, some people can do.
What do you mean non-robust versus robust?
Well, like the chandelier falling on the crib, I think that's a very robust phenomenon. And the precog mother, to me, that's robust. That saves a life. I think the statistical stuff and a lot of the remote viewing stuff is not robust. It's not saving a life. It's not available on command. It's maybe trainable, but it's the little stuff that's trainable. It's not the extreme stuff.
Reading minds would be the little stuff. Interesting.
Depends. Depends on how that happens. It could be really robust. Like if I know instantly that my grandmother has died, to me that's robust, but that's not trainable. That just happens. And so for me, Jonathan, let me to take this back to religion. There is this distinction between revelation and knowledge or knowing. I think revelation is something. It's a form of knowledge that's given to human beings that they're subjects or objects of. I don't think they're consciously willing this, even though I think they're responsible for it on some level, but certainly not on an egoic or a social level.
But even though it's not trainable, there are certain things one can do to be more receptive. It's almost like the Christian idea of grace to these. For example, you mentioned you had your mystical experience while you were sick, you were in a foreign land. So for the exact same person, the exact same genes, the exact same talent, there are things you can do to be more receptive to these.
Yeah, so, I've been very informed.
Asceticism, right? Pain on the body, trauma, active trauma. Yeah.
But here, I've been very informed by a colleague and friend of mine named Kevin Can, and he talks a lot about neurodiversity. I think the way we talk about neurodiversity, the way we talk about autism, for example, I think those people are just set up differently. And I think they have a capacity to experience these things that other people just don't.
Right. And even with a normal spectrum, there are people like you and I who are thicker and harder to experience, and there are people who are much more attuned to this. Yeah. The last set of ethical questions I want to ask you is around politics. And the first question I want to ask you is, I would generally describe your politics, reading your books, as standard academic, left, progressive.
Yeah, I would agree.
Defending gender theory and liberal values and the little guy and egalitarianism.
Right.
Why haven't you put maybe you have, the comparativist lens on politics in the way you have religion? Like, why haven't you entertained the radicality of all various political positions and dealt with them in the same way as religion?
So a lot of my work is dealing with marginality. I really believe that profound religious experience comes from marginality. And my early career was really on sexuality and gender. But I think it's the marginal sexuality, the marginal gender that ends up having the inspiration, as it were. And my interest in the paranormal is, again, it's about marginality. I think we dismiss these experiences in general. So I went from queering religion essentially to weirding religion. And I think, but it's all about social marginality. And I think that's drives a lot of the political values that I have, if I can put it that way.
I see. Let me try to articulate this, which is, as a scholar of mysticism, you see the people and groups that are being ignored, and you realize how important they are, and that's where your politics flows out of.
But I think they actually drive the ideas and the religions. It's not just
Right. Like Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah,
right? Yeah, exactly.
It's not just, I think they're marginal and therefore they need to be uplifted. It's like, no, they really are driving this
closer.
thing.
They're closer.
They're closer to the truth of things than the people in the main line, as it were. So the politics and the ethics are driven by this marginality, but also by my sense of reality. I think people are closer to things, closer to reality.
Right. In the same way that you think, for example, Buddhism is closer than the monotheisms, right? Yeah. So let me give you a quote from your book that I think is pushing back against over-politicization and over-activism, okay? Imagine a secular world, a secular social world, in which all our class, gender, sexual, racial, and ecological concerns were acknowledged and adequately met. Imagine, in effect, a moral utopia. Would any of this resolve the ancient and universal religious questions of the human condition? Would we then be able to answer the ultimate questions? Who are we really? Where did we come from? What is the world we find ourselves in? How did we end up here and why? And where will we go after we die? So I take this to an Epicurean extreme. My politics is, don't get involved in politics.
Right.
It's, I'm going to step back. I'm going to protect maybe a small community where I can do my scholarly work, but I'm not going to get involved because of this intuition. I just don't think it's anywhere close to the highest thing.
I don't either.
What am I missing with my apoliticism, if anything, in relation to the mystical realm?
You know, part of it is that, as you know, the academy is driven by political issues. It's very much formed around political identity and moral issues. And my area of expertise is religion. And so part of it is just poking at where I think the field is and saying, look, this isn't going to get you there. This is
not the ultimate.
This is not the ultimate. And so this is really driven by metaphysical commitments of mine that I just don't think that these are ultimate concerns. And I think you're going to die anyway. I mean, look, life's going to kill you. None of us get out of here alive, as we say. So, you know, and there are good and there are bad political systems in terms of human flourishing, but life itself, frankly, sucks, you know, in terms of the end point. So how do we address that? How do we talk about that? You know, that's really the question that drives a lot of my work.
Right. So,
I don't think it's a political question.
Interesting. And so you don't, I'm actually surprised by this, you don't see an issue with my political withdrawal into a perhaps almost monastic community to investigate these questions.
I mean, no,
because I feel like you quite engage with this on some level, right?
But I'm engaged with it because I live and breathe in the academy, and I work in university administration, and I want to engage people, and I want to authorize this conversation. I mean, I do it for very practical, I guess, political reasons.
This is your Epicurean community, right? This is the small community you have to protect to do your work. Yeah.
But I wanted to be a monk, Jonathan, and that in some ways is an apolitical.
As apolitical as it gets.
Yeah, choice as well. So I don't disagree or want to disallow that or dissuade that in any way. I think that's I get it. I totally get that.
I see. Thank you for a fascinating interview, Professor.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching my interview. If you want to go even deeper into these ideas, then please join my email list at jonathanb.com. You'll not only get full-length episodes, but also transcripts, book notes, and invitations to future lectures. Now, if you like this interview, be sure to check out my other ones with Jeff Kripal as well. You can find links to those episodes and everything else we discuss in the description and on my website, jonathanb.com. Thank you.